The year was 1943, and the Allied command faced an impossible puzzle. How could they launch the largest seaborne invasion in human history without the enemy knowing exactly where and when it would happen? Deep within the war rooms of London, brilliant minds were crafting what would become the most audacious deception operation of the Second World War. Operation Bodyguard, the overarching deception strategy, emerged from months of careful planning by the London Controlling Section, Britain's top-secret deception planning organisation. The masterminds behind this elaborate scheme understood that winning the war might depend less on conventional firepower and more on the ancient art of misdirection. Their challenge was monumental: convince Adolf Hitler and his generals that the inevitable Allied invasion of Western Europe would strike anywhere but Normandy. The German Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, a formidable barrier of concrete bunkers, artillery positions, and obstacles designed to repel any invasion attempt. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, tasked with strengthening these coastal defences, had transformed the European coastline into what many considered an impregnable fortress. Yet the Allies possessed a crucial advantage that the Germans could never have anticipated. They had successfully broken the Enigma code and could read German communications, allowing them to monitor how effectively their deceptions were working. Within this broader deception framework, Operation Fortitude began taking shape. Split into two primary components, Fortitude North aimed to convince the Germans that Norway would face an Allied assault, while Fortitude South focused on the more critical deception, making the German High Command believe that the main invasion would target the Pas-de-Calais region of France, not the beaches of Normandy. This elaborate misdirection would require every tool of deception available to the Allied forces. The foundation of Fortitude South rested on creating an entirely fictional military formation, the 1st United States Army Group, known by its acronym FUSAG. This phantom army would allegedly mass in southeastern England, directly across the English Channel from Calais, providing the perfect launching point for what the Germans would believe to be the primary invasion force. To command this non-existent army, the Allies selected General George S. Patton, whose reputation for aggressive tactics had earned him both respect and fear from German military leaders. The psychological warfare began with understanding German expectations. Hitler and his generals, including Rommel, already believed that Calais represented the most logical invasion target due to its proximity to England and the excellent port facilities that would be essential for sustaining a major military operation. The Allies simply needed to reinforce this existing belief, while simultaneously drawing attention away from their actual preparations in southwestern England. Radio deception formed the first layer of this intricate web of lies. Skilled operators created an entire network of fictional radio communications, mimicking the patterns and procedures of genuine military units. These phantom transmissions suggested massive troop movements, supply operations, and administrative activities consistent with preparing for a major cross-channel assault. The radio operators studied actual military communication styles so thoroughly that their fake messages were indistinguishable from authentic military traffic. Double agents played equally crucial roles in this deception orchestra. The British had successfully captured and turned virtually every German spy operating in Britain, creating a network of controlled information sources feeding carefully crafted intelligence back to German command. These double agents would soon become instrumental in selling the Germans on the reality of FUSAG and the imminent threat to Calais, setting the stage for one of the most creative and effective military deceptions in history. As 1943 drew to a close, the pieces of this grand deception were falling into place, but the most visually striking and psychologically effective elements were yet to come. The transformation of artists, designers, and creative professionals into soldiers of deception began in early 1944 with the formation of one of the most unusual military units in American history. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, soon to be known as the Ghost Army, represented a revolutionary approach to warfare, one that would rely on imagination, creativity, and theatrical skills rather than conventional weapons. This extraordinary unit comprised 1,900 men who possessed talents that traditional military thinking had never before considered strategically valuable. Among their ranks were artists who had created window displays for department stores, sound engineers who had worked in Hollywood studios, architects who understood the principles of visual illusion, and designers whose peacetime careers had involved creating convincing facades and theatrical sets. The military had recognized that modern warfare increasingly demanded skills in deception and misdirection. The Ghost Army was organized into 4 specialized companies, each contributing unique capabilities to their deception operations. The 603rd Camouflage Engineering Battalion became the visual artists of this military theater, responsible for creating physical illusions that could fool enemy reconnaissance from both ground and aerial observation. The 3132 Signal Service Company handled sonic deception, using massive speaker systems and carefully recorded sound effects to create auditory illusions of military activity. Supporting them was the Signal Company Special, which specialized in radio deception and electronic warfare techniques. The 406th Engineer Combat Company Special provided essential security and construction support, ensuring that these elaborate deceptions could be mounted and maintained under battlefield conditions. Led by Captain George Rebb, these 168 men were trained as fighting soldiers, ready to defend their creative colleagues while they worked their theatrical magic on the battlefields of Europe. The concept of using inflatable military equipment emerged from necessity and innovation. Traditional camouflage and concealment techniques could hide real equipment, but the Allies needed to create the appearance of military strength where none existed. The solution lay in rubber technology that had been advancing rapidly during the war years due to critical shortages of natural rubber. American industry had developed sophisticated synthetic rubber manufacturing capabilities, producing materials that could be shaped into convincing military replicas. The inflatable tank became the signature weapon of visual deception. These remarkable creations were built using a framework of inflatable tubes covered with specially treated neoprene skin that could withstand outdoor conditions while maintaining its shape under various weather conditions. Each inflatable M4 Sherman tank measured 18 feet 4 inches long, 8 feet 3 inches wide, and 7 feet 9 inches to the top of the turret when fully inflated. Weighing only 93 pounds when deflated, these rubber replicas could be transported easily and assembled quickly under cover of darkness. The inflation process required precisely 20 minutes using portable air compressors, and the Ghost Army developed efficient assembly procedures that allowed them to create entire armored formations seemingly overnight. The turret was manufactured as a separate component, inflated independently, and then attached to the main body of the tank, allowing for realistic positioning and orientation. Once inflated, these replicas were painted with authentic military markings and weathered to appear genuine from aerial reconnaissance altitudes. The attention to detail in these deceptions was extraordinary. Artists within the Ghost Army studied actual military equipment intensively, noting how genuine tanks appeared under different lighting conditions, how they cast shadows, and how they weathered under field conditions. They applied this knowledge to their inflatable creations, adding painted details that would be invisible to ground observers but perfectly clear to German reconnaissance aircraft flying at typical observation altitudes. Beyond tanks, the Ghost Army created inflatable artillery pieces, trucks, half-tracks, and even aircraft. Each type of equipment required different inflation techniques and mounting procedures, but the principle remained consistent. Create convincing replicas that would fool enemy observation while being light enough for rapid deployment and repositioning. These inflatable forces could simulate entire armored divisions, complete with appropriate vehicle spacing, camouflage patterns, and tactical arrangements that matched genuine military doctrine. The psychological impact of this visual deception extended beyond merely showing German reconnaissance pilots what the Allies wanted them to see. The inflatable equipment had to be deliberately imperfect in its camouflage, visible enough that German aerial photography would capture clear images while still appearing to be genuine attempts at concealment. This delicate balance required artistic judgment and understanding of how military units typically attempted to hide their equipment from aerial observation. As spring 1944 approached, these artist soldiers prepared to deploy their unique skills in support of the greatest military operation in history. Their success would depend not only on the technical quality of their creations, but also on their ability to sustain elaborate theatrical performances under the pressures of actual combat conditions. The deployment of the Ghost Army's deception capabilities began in earnest during the spring of 1944, as the elaborate staging for Operation Fortitude South transformed southeastern England into the world's largest outdoor theatre production. The success of this massive deception would depend on perfect coordination between visual illusions, sonic effects, radio deception, and human intelligence operations. The selection of deployment sites required careful geographical and strategic consideration. The Ghost Army established their primary deception installations in Kent and Sussex, regions of southeastern England that faced directly across the English Channel toward the Pas-de-Calais region of France. These locations provided optimal visibility for German reconnaissance aircraft, while maintaining reasonable security for the actual invasion preparations occurring further west in southwestern England. The visual component of the deception began with the systematic deployment of hundreds of inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, and military vehicles arranged in patterns that mimicked genuine armored and infantry divisions preparing for assault operations. The Ghost Army's artists had studied actual military unit formations extensively, understanding how real commanders positioned their equipment for maximum tactical effectiveness while attempting to minimize vulnerability to enemy observation. Each installation required meticulous attention to detail that would satisfy German aerial reconnaissance analysis. The spacing between vehicles followed authentic military doctrine. Supply areas were positioned appropriately for the simulated unit size, and defensive positions were arranged exactly as genuine military commanders would deploy their forces. The Ghost Army even created fake motor pools, ammunition dumps, and headquarters facilities using a combination of inflatable equipment and temporary structures that would appear convincing from reconnaissance altitudes. The sonic deception operations provided crucial auditory evidence supporting the visual illusions. Using massive speaker systems capable of projecting sound effects over distances of 15 miles, the Ghost Army broadcast carefully recorded audio of tank movements, construction activities, troop formations, and general military bustling that would be expected from large-scale invasion preparations. These recordings had been made by monitoring actual military operations, capturing authentic sounds of M4 Sherman tanks climbing hills, supply convoys moving at night, and thousands of soldiers establishing encampments. The psychological impact of these sonic illusions extended beyond simple sound effects. German listening posts along the French coast could detect and analyze the audio signatures of Allied activities, providing intelligence analysts with data about the scale and nature of invasion preparations. By broadcasting sounds consistent with massive military buildup directly across from Calais, the Ghost Army reinforced German expectations that this region represented the primary invasion target. Radio deception operations added another layer of credibility to the FUSAG deception. Skilled radio operators created entire networks of fictional communications, generating message traffic that simulated the administrative and operational communications of a genuine army group preparing for major combat operations. These operators had studied the communication patterns, procedures, and even the personal transmission styles of actual military radio personnel, enabling them to create authentic-sounding traffic that would pass detailed German analysis. The radio deception required maintaining consistent fictional narratives over extended periods. Each phantom unit within FUSAG had to maintain plausible communication patterns, coordinate with other fictional units, and demonstrate the types of administrative activities that genuine military formations would generate during invasion preparations. This required the radio operators to essentially become method actors, immersing themselves completely in their fictional roles while maintaining perfect consistency with their elaborate cover stories. Intelligence operations supported these deceptions through carefully controlled information flows to German intelligence services. The British double-agent network had achieved complete control over German espionage activities within Britain, allowing Allied intelligence services to feed precisely calibrated information to German commanders. These double agents reported on the massive military buildup they supposedly observed in southeastern England, providing German intelligence with detailed descriptions of FUSAG's preparations. Juan Pujol Garcia, operating under the codename Garbo, became perhaps the most effective double agent supporting Operation Fortitude. His fictional network of sub-agents supposedly provided German intelligence with comprehensive reporting on Allied invasion preparations, consistently reinforcing the deception that Calais represented the primary target. Garcia's reports were so convincing that German intelligence awarded him the Iron Cross, while simultaneously the British honored him for his contributions to Allied victory. The integration of these deception elements required unprecedented coordination between visual, auditory, radio, and human intelligence operations. Each component had to support and reinforce the others while maintaining perfect consistency with the overall fictional narrative. The Ghost Army developed sophisticated procedures for coordinating their activities, ensuring that visual displays, sonic effects, and radio communications all told the same story to German intelligence analysts. The psychological dimension of this deception extended beyond technical execution to include behavioral elements that would convince any German agents who might observe Allied personnel directly. Ghost Army soldiers were trained to discuss their fictional units and missions in local pubs and restaurants, spreading carefully crafted stories that would reach German intelligence through civilian informants. These soldiers had to become completely immersed in their fictional identities, maintaining their cover stories even during off-duty social interactions. As summer 1944 approached, this elaborate masquerade had achieved remarkable success in convincing German commanders that FUSAG represented a genuine threat to Calais. The stage was set for the final phase of deception operations that would need to maintain German attention on the wrong target, even after the real invasion had begun at Normandy. The German intelligence apparatus, considered among the most sophisticated in the world during 1944, fell completely under the spell of Allied deception operations through a combination of psychological manipulation, technological superiority, and masterful exploitation of existing German strategic assumptions. The success of Operation Fortitude demonstrated how even the most professional intelligence organizations could be systematically deceived when their adversaries understood and manipulated their analytical processes. German reconnaissance efforts focused heavily on aerial photography and radio intercept operations, both of which the Allies had anticipated and prepared to exploit. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft, conducting regular surveillance flights over southeastern England, captured thousands of photographs showing exactly what the Allies wanted them to see: massive concentrations of military equipment, supply installations, and invasion preparations pointing directly toward Calais. German photo analysts, working with the best equipment and techniques available, confirmed the presence of substantial Allied forces in precisely the locations that supported their existing strategic assessments. The technical quality of the Ghost Army's visual deceptions proved sufficient to fool professional military intelligence analysis. German photo interpreters, examining reconnaissance images through high-powered magnification equipment, saw properly spaced tank formations, appropriately positioned artillery batteries, and logically arranged support facilities that perfectly matched their understanding of how Allied forces would prepare for a major assault operation. The deliberate imperfection of camouflage efforts made these installations appear genuine. Real military units would naturally attempt to conceal their equipment, while sometimes failing to achieve perfect concealment. Radio intelligence operations provided German analysts with extensive electronic evidence supporting the visual deceptions. German monitoring stations intercepted massive volumes of Allied radio traffic originating from southeastern England, with communication patterns consistent with large-scale military operations. The fictional radio networks created by the Ghost Army generated administrative messages, operational communications, and routine military traffic that perfectly matched German understanding of how genuine Allied units would communicate during invasion preparations. The sophistication of German signal intelligence capabilities worked against them in this context. Their ability to identify specific Allied radio operators, track unit movements through communication patterns, and analyze the content of intercepted messages gave them confidence in intelligence that was entirely fabricated. The Ghost Army's radio operators had studied actual Allied communication procedures so thoroughly that their fictional traffic was indistinguishable from authentic military communications. General Hans Kramer's unwitting contribution to German intelligence deception represented perhaps the most audacious element of the entire operation. When Kramer was released from Allied prisoner-of-war camps through a prisoner exchange program, Allied intelligence services orchestrated an elaborate deception during his repatriation journey. They drove him through southwestern England, where genuine D-Day invasion preparations were occurring, while convincing him that he was traveling through southeastern England near the supposed Fusagi installations. The psychological manipulation of Kramer involved changing road signs, positioning military personnel to make casual references to locations in southeastern England, and ensuring that his route took him past actual military preparations that he would interpret as evidence of the fictional invasion force targeting Calais. This deception exploited German confidence in their own generals' observational abilities. Intelligence provided by a recently repatriated German officer would carry far more credibility than reports from agents or reconnaissance operations. When Kramer returned to Germany and reported his observations to Field Marshal Rommel and other senior commanders, his eyewitness account provided seemingly irrefutable confirmation of Allied invasion intentions. His detailed descriptions of massive military preparations targeting Calais reinforced existing German strategic assumptions, while coming from a source that German intelligence considered completely reliable and beyond Allied manipulation. The German intelligence community's analytical processes worked systematically in favor of Allied deception efforts. German commanders already believed that Calais represented the most logical invasion target due to its geographical proximity to England, excellent port facilities, and strategic position for advancing toward Germany. Operation Fortitude simply reinforced these existing beliefs with carefully crafted evidence that confirmed German strategic assumptions rather than challenging them with contradictory information. The timing of German intelligence assessments also favored Allied deception operations. As D-Day approached, German analysts received increasing volumes of evidence supporting the Calais deception, while simultaneously observing what appeared to be relatively routine Allied activities in southwestern England. The contrast between obvious invasion preparations in southeastern England and apparently normal military activities in other regions convinced German intelligence that they had correctly identified Allied intentions. Abwehr, the German military intelligence service, and the Sicherheitsdienst, the SS intelligence organization, both reached independent conclusions, supporting the Calais assessment based on their analysis of the same carefully orchestrated evidence. This intelligence consensus, reached through supposedly independent analytical processes, provided German commanders with confidence that their strategic assessments were accurate and well-founded. The success of these deception operations extended beyond tactical intelligence to strategic decision-making at the highest levels of German command. Hitler himself became convinced that Calais represented the primary invasion target, leading to defensive preparations and troop deployments that would prove catastrophic when the real invasion struck Normandy. The German strategic reserve, including crucial armored divisions, remained positioned to counter an invasion at Calais rather than reinforcing the actual landing sites at Normandy. As June 6, 1944 approached, German intelligence services remained completely convinced that they understood Allied invasion plans, unaware that their most sophisticated analytical capabilities had been systematically exploited to support the greatest military deception in modern history. The morning of June 6, 1944, revealed the devastating effectiveness of Allied deception operations as German forces found themselves completely unprepared for the massive assault striking the beaches of Normandy, while their attention remained focused on defending against phantom armies that would never materialize at Calais. The success of Operation Fortitude created tactical and strategic confusion within German command that persisted long after the initial landings had established Allied footholds on French soil. German coastal defenders at Normandy faced the full fury of Allied amphibious assault, while their commanders initially believed they were witnessing a diversionary attack designed to draw attention away from the real invasion that would soon strike Calais. This fundamental misunderstanding of Allied intentions prevented German forces from responding appropriately to the Normandy landings during the crucial first hours when aggressive counterattacks might have driven the Allies back into the sea. The German military response demonstrated the profound psychological impact of successful strategic deception. Field Marshal Rommel was visiting Germany on June 6, confident that weather conditions would prevent any invasion attempt and unaware that Allied meteorologists had identified a brief window of acceptable conditions for the assault. His absence from the crucial battle area reflected the success of Allied deception in convincing German commanders that immediate invasion was unlikely and would occur at a different location when it did materialize. German armored reserves, including the powerful panzer divisions that might have contested the Allied landings, remained positioned to counter the expected invasion at Calais rather than reinforcing Normandy. Hitler himself, still convinced that the primary Allied assault would target Calais, refused to authorize the movement of strategic reserves toward Normandy during the critical first day of the invasion. This decision, based entirely on his acceptance of Allied deception, allowed Allied forces to establish secure beachheads before facing significant armored counterattacks. The Ghost Army's deception operations continued supporting Allied objectives even after the Normandy landings began. Radio deception maintained the fiction that Fusag remained in southeastern England, preparing for its own assault on Calais. These phantom communications convinced German intelligence that the Normandy landings represented only the first phase of a broader Allied strategy that would soon unleash an even larger invasion force against their expected target. German reconnaissance efforts continued identifying evidence of massive Allied preparations in southeastern England, unaware that they were observing the same inflatable equipment and fictional installations that had deceived them for months. Luftwaffe photographic missions returned with images showing continued Allied buildup across from Calais, reinforcing German expectations that this region remained under imminent threat of invasion. The persistence of German strategic misconceptions reflected the thoroughness of Allied deception planning. Even as Allied forces struggled to expand their Normandy beachheads against determined German resistance, German commanders continued withholding reserves that might have tipped the balance during those critical first weeks. The fictional threat to Calais continued drawing German attention and resources away from the actual battle sites, where Allied success remained uncertain. Intelligence reports from German double agents, still controlled by British intelligence services, continued reinforcing the Calais deception long after D-Day had revealed Allied intentions. These agents reported that Fusag remained in southeastern England, awaiting optimal conditions for its own assault. German intelligence analysts, having invested so much confidence in these sources, found it difficult to reassess their strategic assumptions even when confronted with contradictory evidence from the Normandy battlefields. The human cost of German strategic confusion became apparent as Allied forces consolidated their positions and began expanding inland from the invasion beaches. German defensive efforts remained divided between actual combat operations in Normandy and continued preparations for the expected invasion at Calais. This division of effort and attention prevented German forces from mounting the concentrated resistance that might have seriously threatened Allied success during the vulnerable early phases of the campaign. The psychological impact of successful deception extended beyond military considerations to affect German civilian morale and political leadership confidence. German propaganda had repeatedly assured the population that the Atlantic Wall would repel any invasion attempt, and the apparent ease with which Allied forces had established themselves in Normandy raised serious questions about German defensive capabilities. The revelation that German intelligence had been so thoroughly deceived further undermined confidence in military leadership and strategic planning. By the end of June 1944, the success of Operation Fortitude had achieved objectives that extended far beyond the immediate tactical advantages gained during the D-Day landings. German strategic reserves remained committed to defending against invasions that would never occur, while Allied forces had gained sufficient time and space to build up overwhelming strength in their actual operational area. The deception had created strategic momentum that would carry Allied forces through the liberation of France and eventually to victory in Western Europe. The Ghost Army's inflatable tanks and Phantom Armies had proven more effective than many genuine military units in shaping the outcome of World War II. Their invisible war of deception and misdirection had contributed to Allied victory through creativity, ingenuity, and theatrical skills that professional military thinking had never previously considered strategically valuable. The success of D-Day marked not the conclusion, but rather the transformation of Allied deception operations, as the Ghost Army adapted their techniques to support the advancing Allied forces throughout the campaign to liberate Western Europe. The inflatable tanks and Phantom Armies that had deceived German intelligence before the invasion would continue their invisible war across the battlefields of France, Belgium, and eventually Germany itself. The Ghost Army's post-invasion operations required entirely different tactical approaches than their pre-D-Day strategic deceptions. Instead of creating static displays designed to fool aerial reconnaissance, they now needed mobile deception capabilities that could support rapidly advancing Allied forces, while confusing German commanders about Allied strength, intentions, and operational capabilities. Their traveling road show of deception would stage more than 20 separate operations between the Normandy landings and the end of the war in Europe. The psychological warfare value of these continuing deceptions extended beyond simple tactical misdirection to strategic influence over German decision-making processes. German commanders having been so thoroughly deceived about Allied invasion plans, found it increasingly difficult to distinguish between genuine Allied activities and elaborate deceptions. This uncertainty forced German intelligence analysts to question every piece of information they received, creating analytical paralysis that benefited Allied operations throughout the remainder of the war. Mobile deception operations presented unique logistical challenges that tested the Ghost Army's creativity and adaptability. Their inflatable equipment had to be transported, deployed, and recovered under battlefield conditions while maintaining operational security that prevented German forces from discovering the deception. The unit developed sophisticated procedures for rapid deployment and extraction, enabling them to create convincing military installations overnight and disappear before German counterattacks could reach their positions. The evolution of German defensive tactics in response to Allied advances created new opportunities for deception operations. As German forces retreated toward their homeland, they increasingly relied on mobile defense strategies that required accurate intelligence about Allied force dispositions and operational intentions. The Ghost Army exploited these intelligence requirements by creating false evidence of Allied activities that would draw German forces away from actual Allied operations or convince them to deploy defensive resources inappropriately. River crossing operations provided particularly effective opportunities for Ghost Army deceptions. By creating the illusion of major Allied crossing attempts at locations where German forces expected them, the Ghost Army could draw defensive attention away from actual crossing sites where genuine Allied forces would encounter reduced resistance. These operations required precise coordination between the deception unit and actual Allied forces to ensure that German responses to the false threats would benefit real Allied operations. The sophistication of Ghost Army operations continued developing throughout the European campaign as they gained experience with battlefield deception techniques and learned to exploit German intelligence vulnerabilities more effectively. Their integration with conventional Allied forces improved substantially, enabling genuine military units to coordinate their operations with deception activities for maximum tactical advantage. The boundary between real and phantom Allied capabilities became increasingly blurred from the German perspective. Urban warfare environments presented new challenges for deception operations as Allied forces advanced into heavily populated areas where civilian observations might compromise operational security. The Ghost Army adapted their techniques to urban settings, creating deceptions that would be convincing to German intelligence while remaining plausible to civilian populations who might observe their activities. These urban deceptions often involved simulating Allied preparations for major assaults on defended cities, encouraging German forces to concentrate their defenses inappropriately. The technical quality of Ghost Army equipment continued improving throughout the war, as American industrial capabilities provided more sophisticated inflatable replicas and audio equipment. Later versions of inflatable tanks included more realistic details and weathering effects that would fool even close inspection under appropriate lighting conditions. The sonic deception capabilities expanded to include more diverse audio effects and improved projection systems that could create convincing illusions over greater distances. Intelligence feedback from captured German documents and prisoner interrogations revealed the continuing effectiveness of Ghost Army deceptions throughout the European campaign. German operational reports frequently referenced Allied units and activities that existed only in the imaginations of the Ghost Army's artists and sound engineers. These references appeared in official German military communications, demonstrating that the deceptions had achieved complete integration into German strategic and tactical planning processes. The psychological impact of successful deception extended beyond immediate tactical advantages to influence German morale and confidence in their intelligence capabilities. German commanders became increasingly suspicious of their own intelligence services as repeated deceptions revealed the extent to which Allied forces had manipulated their decision-making processes. This erosion of confidence in intelligence assessments made German forces more cautious and less responsive to genuine tactical opportunities. As Allied forces approached the German border, the Ghost Army's deception operations took on additional strategic significance by influencing German assessments of Allied capabilities for the final assault on Nazi Germany. Their phantom armies continued suggesting Allied strength levels that exceeded actual capabilities, encouraging German forces to maintain defensive positions that might otherwise have been abandoned or reinforced. The conclusion of World War II in Europe marked the end of one of history's most successful and innovative military deception campaigns, as the Ghost Army's inflatable tanks and phantom armies completed their invisible contribution to Allied victory. The effectiveness of their operations had exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of Allied planners, demonstrating the strategic value of creativity, imagination, and theatrical skills in modern warfare. The Ghost Army's final operations during the advance into Germany required adapting their deception techniques to support the concluding phases of the European war, while German resistance intensified as Allied forces approached the Nazi homeland. Their phantom divisions continued drawing German attention and resources away from actual Allied operations, maintaining the strategic confusion that had characterized German responses to Allied activities since the successful D-Day deceptions. The revelation of Ghost Army operations to capture German commanders provided dramatic confirmation of the deception campaign's effectiveness throughout the war. German officers, when informed about the true nature of the phantom armies they had been tracking and responding to for months, expressed amazement at the sophistication and audacity of Allied deception efforts. Many admitted that they had never suspected that such elaborate theatrical operations were being conducted alongside conventional military activities. German military records, captured as Allied forces overran Nazi administrative centers, contained extensive documentation of intelligence assessments and operational decisions based entirely on Ghost Army deceptions. These documents revealed that German commanders had allocated substantial resources to countering threats that existed only as inflatable equipment and sound effects. The strategic impact of these misdirected efforts had contributed significantly to German defensive failures throughout the latter stages of the war. The technical innovation demonstrated by Ghost Army operations influenced post-war military thinking about the integration of deception capabilities into conventional force structures. Military planners recognized that modern warfare would increasingly require sophisticated deception capabilities that could exploit enemy intelligence systems and decision-making processes. The Ghost Army's success demonstrated that relatively small, specialized units could achieve strategic impact far exceeding their size and conventional combat capability. The psychological dimensions of successful strategic deception became subjects of intensive post-war analysis as military researchers attempted to understand how professional intelligence organizations had been so thoroughly deceived. The German intelligence failure during Operation Fortitude provided valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities of even sophisticated intelligence systems when confronted with well-planned and executed deception campaigns. These lessons would influence intelligence and counterintelligence practices throughout the Cold War era. The individual stories of Ghost Army personnel revealed the human dimensions of this unique military unit, as artists, designers, and creative professionals returned to civilian careers enriched by their wartime experiences in military deception. Many continued applying skills developed during their service in commercial and artistic endeavors, bringing innovative approaches to peacetime challenges. Their wartime service remained classified for decades, preventing public recognition of their contributions until government secrecy restrictions were finally lifted. The technological legacy of Ghost Army innovations extended beyond military applications to influence development of materials, manufacturing processes, and design techniques that found civilian applications in various industries. The inflatable structures and synthetic materials developed for military deception operations contributed to advances in construction, entertainment, and industrial design fields. The integration of visual, audio, and electronic deception techniques pioneered approaches to multimedia presentation that would evolve into modern entertainment and communication technologies. The strategic lessons of Operation Fortitude and Ghost Army operations became foundational elements of modern military doctrine regarding the integration of information warfare, psychological operations, and traditional combat activities. Military planners recognized that future conflicts would require sophisticated capabilities for influencing enemy decision-making processes through carefully orchestrated deception campaigns. The success of World War II deception operations established deception as an essential element of comprehensive military strategy. The long-term historical impact of Ghost Army operations extended beyond their immediate contribution to Allied victory to influence fundamental concepts about the nature of modern warfare. Their success demonstrated that victory in contemporary conflicts might depend as much on information superiority and psychological manipulation as on traditional military capabilities. This recognition would shape military thinking throughout the nuclear era and into the information age. The human cost savings achieved through successful deception operations provided compelling evidence for the strategic value of non-lethal approaches to military objectives. By preventing German forces from mounting effective resistance to Allied operations, the Ghost Army's Phantom Armies had contributed to reducing casualties on both sides while accelerating the conclusion of the war. This humanitarian dimension of successful deception operations would influence military ethical thinking about the conduct of warfare. The international recognition of Ghost Army contributions came decades after their wartime service, when declassification of military records finally allowed public acknowledgement of their achievements. The Congressional Gold Medal awarded to surviving Ghost Army veterans in 2024 represented long overdue recognition of their unique contribution to Allied victory and their pioneering role in developing modern military deception capabilities. As the last surviving veterans of the Ghost Army advanced into their final years, their legacy continued influencing military thinking about the integration of creativity, technology, and strategic thinking in addressing complex national security challenges. Their invisible war had demonstrated that victory sometimes requires weapons that exist only in the imagination, and that the most effective battles might be won without firing a single shot. The story of the Ghost Army and their inflatable tanks represents one of history's most remarkable examples of how creativity, intelligence, and imagination can achieve strategic objectives that conventional military force alone could never accomplish. These 100 artists, designers, and creative professionals proved that modern warfare requires more than traditional military capabilities. It demands innovation, adaptability, and the courage to attempt operations that professional military thinking had never previously considered possible. The success of Operation Fortitude and the Ghost Army's deception campaigns fundamentally changed military understanding of information warfare, psychological operations, and the strategic value of deception in modern conflict. Their Phantom Armies demonstrated that perception can become reality when skillfully managed, and that the enemy's mind represents the ultimate battlefield where decisive victories can be achieved without traditional combat. Today, as we face an era of hybrid warfare, cyber operations, and information conflicts, the lessons learned from the Ghost Army's inflatable tanks remain remarkably relevant. Their success in manipulating enemy decision-making processes through carefully orchestrated deception provides valuable insights for contemporary challenges in national security, international relations, and strategic competition. The fundamental principles they pioneered, understanding the adversary's analytical processes, exploiting existing beliefs, and maintaining consistent deception narratives, continue influencing military and intelligence operations around the world. The human dimension of their story reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, and that victory sometimes requires thinking beyond traditional approaches to seemingly impossible challenges. The artists who became warriors, the designers who became strategists, and the creative professionals who became crucial contributors to Allied victory demonstrated that diverse perspectives and unconventional skills can provide solutions that traditional military training might never discover. Their invisible war serves as a testament to the power of imagination in service of freedom, creativity in defense of democracy, and the enduring truth that sometimes the most effective weapons are those that exist only in the mind of the enemy. The Ghost Army's inflatable tanks fooled German reconnaissance planes into seeing phantom armies, but their real achievement was demonstrating that human ingenuity and creativity represent the ultimate weapons in any conflict where the stakes justify the imagination required to achieve victory.